9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is the DSR Podcast. Hello and welcome to DSR's Words Matter. I'm David Rothkopf and I'm joined, as always, by the man you want to hear from, Norm Ornstein. It's the middle of the summer, Norm. Congress is done for probably the next 18 months. But do I have that wrong? Do you expect them to do anything in the next? But I mean,
well, let me give
they'll
you the
scrape.
caveat, David. I mean, one thing they have done, they took one thing off the table in their. I still gag and throw up a little in my mouth every time I use the phrase "one big beautiful bill." But they took the debt ceiling off the table by showing how fiscally conservative they are and raising the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. So they don't have to confront that in the fall. But they are going to have to confront the next year's spending bills by October 1, when the new fiscal year begins. And they're not going to have an easy time doing that unless Democrats, as the Senate under Chuck Schumer did, bail them out again by letting them cobble together their own spending bills without Democrats and, basically cave. The other thing is the Senate still has to vote on this so-called recision package. Now, what's that? Trump unilaterally cut out funding for PEPFAR, the greatest accomplishment of George Bush's presidency, which means cutting out funding for AIDS drugs, which has already meant many, many thousands of unnecessary deaths. And he unilaterally cut out funding for public broadcasting, among other things. This was illegal. These had been appropriated funds. So he eventually, yielding to what Congress wanted, turned that into a so-called recision package. I won't go into all of the wonky details, but before 1974, presidents had limited authority to just decide not to spend money that had been appropriated, usually good reasons, and often they would delay for a while and then put the money back in. Richard Nixon turned it into a political tool to take away funding he didn't like. Congress passed a budget act called the Budget and Impoundment Control Act. Impounding money means you're not going to spend it, period. Recision means that you're going to delay spending it, but it can also mean that you're impounding it. Trump impounded funds illegally. He's turned it into a package, and under the rules, if they don't act within a certain period of time, the spending has to go into effect. Congress can vote and decide whether to agree or block it. And the Senate has not taken this up yet. I go into this detail because we're seeing a couple of interesting dynamics here. One is in the aftermath of the flood in Texas, and that's something we may want to talk about a little bit more. But we learned yet again that rural areas that are a little more remote, often the only communication tool they have to learn about pending disasters is through public media, public radio, for example. So Trump wants to blow all of that up. And among other things, Dan Sullivan, the senator from Alaska, who's up this next time, said, we can't do that. We have remote areas in Alaska that need Alaskan public radio. And Susan Collins, the perpetual, I have misgivings senator, said, I don't want to vote to remove funding for PEPFAR. We have other senators who've indicated some disagreement. And then we have Cornpone John Kennedy, who I swear must wake up every morning wondering how he can soil himself even more in the coming day, saying, what kind of wusses are you this is a measly $9 billion. If we can't do that, what are we here for? So take away emergency communications from rural areas, including in Louisiana. Take away drugs from kids who are going to die of AIDS. That's John Kennedy. But let's face it, far more Republicans are with John Kennedy than they are with these others. And who knows if these others will raise their concerns and then end up voting for this package. So I went into this lengthy and long-winded discussion in response to your simple question. They're done, aren't they? No, they're not.
Well, let's break that down, shall we? By done, by done, I mean that they're not likely to accomplish much. On the spending packages, isn't the tradition in this era of Congress just to come up with continuing resolutions because they can't come up with actual spending packages?
Yes, it is, but let's keep in mind that that still would have to overcome a 60 vote hurdle in the Senate. And those spending packages are still going to relate to appropriations that most Democrats find are anathema. So there's still a set of questions here. And it becomes a question of whether Democrats are willing to use Republican malfeasance to allow a government shutdown, or whether they will, as Schumer and his colleagues did this last time, blink, believing that they'll lose in the event of a shutdown, that Trump and the Republicans' win machine will blame it on them. So it's not a done deal.
There's another thing that you said, which I found really quaint. And I'd just like to zero in on that because you were talking about how Trump illegally rescinded or cut the spending. He does stuff illegally all the time. He extended the TikTok deadline illegally, has done it over and over again. He's imposing tariffs on countries around the world for no reason. Most recently with Brazil, a country, by the way, that we have a surplus with. We're not. We don't even have a trade deficit with Brazil because of political reasons. That's illegal. He, it doesn't seem like the courts or the Congress really cares whether what he is doing is legal. I mean, aren't you just old-fashioned here in talking about legal, illegal? If the president does it, it's okay, right?
That's certainly not only his view, but the view of 6 justices on the Supreme Court, um, which we could get to a little bit later, perhaps. It's true that if we just listed all of the illegal acts or actions taken by Donald Trump, there goes our whole hour, maybe several of our podcasts. And it is absolutely the case that Republicans in Congress, House and Senate, do not raise a single baby toe or little finger in objection to Trump's illegal actions, including those that stomp all over their own prerogatives. And the caveat here is many judges at the district and appeals court level, including lots of Republican nominated judges, including many Trump judges, have raised objections to his illegal acts. We saw yet another one as we have right before we taped today, where a judge with a class action suit blocked Trump again from violating the Constitution on birthright citizenship. But most of these matters go to the Supreme Court, and there Trump has, in effect, with very rare exceptions, 6 lickspittles.
Yeah.
Let me add, David. Let me just add, we also have the press corps, which, when he says things or does things that are illegal, shrugs.
Yeah. Well, the press corps is just completely folding. We have another guy who quit the Washington Post today because he wasn't allowed to say anything critical in a column about about Trump. And we have the publisher of the Washington Post saying, if you don't like our policies here, maybe you ought to work someplace else. And you have CBS and ABC cutting deals with the Trump, in order to, to take care of their corporate business. In the CBS deal, that what they did was they agreed to send money to Trump's presidential library, which is just a big slush fund. So the CBS, ABC, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times got co-opted. Obviously, X got co-opted, and all of this kind of thing. CNN is, playing both sides of the fence. I, I mean, I got to tell you something. I just, we're talking about other stuff, but this struck me yesterday. If you had told me 20 years ago that all of those organizations would have their credibility gone effectively, I would have said you're crazy. These are the foundations of American democracy. And legacy media in the United States, almost without exception, and we haven't talked about the very mixed bag that the New York Times is, where they have some great reporting, but they also have some editors who do crazy stuff. Um, uh, it's just not what it was. I mean, maybe you and I are just, altacockers sitting on a park bench saying, remember when, but remember when these organizations were the backbone of our democracy?
So it's true that we are altacockers sitting on a park bench saying, remember when? But that doesn't mean it's not deeply troubling and unique in our lifetimes. And you're absolutely right. I did not think that we would see the craven behavior of our mainstream press continue. I thought, at least after Trump showed more vividly than before the evilness of what's going on, the headlong rush to full blown autocracy, to a police state, that we would get some pushback. And you're right, the New York Times and the Washington Post still have some absolutely terrific reporters. And they have many stories that are absolutely terrific. But it's also the case, especially for the Times, that there are editors who write the headlines, which is what most people read, if they see it at all, that soft pedal, downplay, and excuse outrageous and illegal behavior. And then we'll run stories. This is not about Trump, but I must say, this story about Mamdani's college application, where facing a set of choices about his background, which were a little bit confusing because his father's family was from Africa and he was born there, even though it was a South Asian heritage, put down in his college application for Columbia that he was both Asian and African, and wrote that was because of that heritage. And they made a big deal out of this and then wrote an explanation that was ridiculous. And what that showed me, and especially the explanation, and this is something pointed out vividly over and over again by the former public editor, Margaret Sullivan, who continues to do great work, that there's no learning curve there. It's not as if, having seen everything that's happened, confronting their own culpability in where we are today, that they're rethinking the way they do things. They're not. And you have the cowards or the greedy ones like Paramount and CBS, Disney and ABC, paying protection money in effect. But then you have the craven ones who just won't do much of anything. And let's start with the White House press corps, which is just an ongoing complete embarrassment, sitting there while the press secretary or the president tell blatant lies. I mean, actually just say incredibly watch the president say incredibly stupid things and don't respond at all. Yesterday, Trump said again, multiple lies. There are states with $1.99 gasoline. There are no states with $1.99 gasoline. He said there are 2 states. Did we have a reporter who even would ask, Mr. President, which 2 states were they? They said nothing. He sat around the table with the president of Liberia, a country formed from the United States, whose official language is English. And as the president of Liberia spoke, he said, "You speak really good English. Where did you learn that?" They don't say a thing. They don't do a thing. We get books about Joe Biden and then, round the clock treatment of that on CNN. And Trump, whose mental deterioration and utter stupidity are on display minute by minute, day by day, we get shrugs.
Yeah, no, it's true. I was thinking about this today. I don't know if you recall this, but back in the olden days, during the Clinton administration, I was a senior trade official. And so I ran the International Trade Administration. I was involved in all sorts of trade stuff. And while it was never the great passion of my life, because I did that, I paid some attention. And I know a lot of trade people. And I was watching Trump's trade policy policies. We passed 90 days without 90 deals. And in fact, of the deals that he said were deals, they weren't even really deals. There were just a handful. And one was a Band-Aid with China, and one was a framework with the UK. And there was a slightly more advanced framework with Vietnam. But even that says in its language that it's a framework. So there are no deals in 90 days. And a lot of these things were illegal, and a lot of these things will achieve nothing. And he's on again, he's off again. It's completely erratic, deadlines and everything else. And it struck me that his trade policy is insane. It's not, we're not having a debate like, should this be the case or not the case? We have gone from having very low tariffs to having, I think at the moment, an average of almost 16% tariffs across the board, which is something like 6 times or 8 times higher than anybody else, for no reason, achieving nothing. And it's insane. But I don't pick up the paper and see anybody going, this is lunacy. It's like having a drunk driving a school bus full of little kids. It's insane. He is destroying our economy. He's destroying the global trading system. He's destroying our credibility. He's pushing up prices. And everybody's like, yes, well, he's put a 30-day extension on the whatever, to no end, with no strategy, with nothing to show for it. And you would think that, the press would cover that, but they don't seem to.
No, and, he said yesterday again, August 1st was always the deadline, which was another lie. And of course, he says over and over, we're going to bring in trillions from foreign countries who are bilking us. But at the same time, we're going to cut these wonderful deals so that we don't have to do the tariffs, which means no revenue coming in. And of course, keeps repeating the nonsense that Americans won't pay for tariffs and no pushback, nothing. And this latest nonsense with Brazil, which was done only to punish them from protecting their own country from the dictator Bolsonaro, who tried to, just like Trump, stage a coup after he lost an election, to putting tariffs on countries. Okay, let's take Korea. We have a signed free trade agreement with Korea. We don't have tariffs with Korea. He sends Korea the same form letter, poorly drafted. It could have been done by a third grader, threatening tariffs for a country that doesn't pay them. And this doesn't get any coverage whatsoever. And you're right. It's not just about the insanity of his views. I keep saying, and we've said on this podcast, If Wharton doesn't rescind his degree, they ought to lose their accreditation if this is the kind of economics they're teaching. Uh, you know, the damage to the economy is overwhelming. And of course, then I've watched some of these interviews with Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, with, I will continue to call him Howard Nutlick, the Commerce Secretary. But Scott Bessent saying there has not been a president in 100 years as literate about economics as Donald Trump. And you think if there were a toady Olympics, Scott Bessent has just moved into the lead for the gold medal, repeating absolute nonsense. No one says anything. He trots out Kevin Hassett, my former colleague, who at one point, at least, you would have considered a serious economist, to spout utter nonsense on various television interviews, and there's no pushback. It's, we're going to get nothing till the economy craters.
Yeah, no, there's no question about that. And we may get nothing then because nobody
Yeah.
seems to want to stand up to him. At what point do people realize he's not running again and he doesn't really have any political power? I mean, isn't that true? Like, I don't understand
Well,
why everybody's living in fear of this guy.
let's give the caveat first that we may not have another presidential election. Um, we're facing a very credible threat of suspension of laws, rules, the Constitution, and martial law on his part. Um, the second is that they're afraid of him because they're afraid that he will unleash physical violence against those who cross him. And even though most of the politicians understand, Republican politicians, there are complete nutcases, there's no doubt. A very large share of them know full well that they're dealing with a narcissistic, sociopathic lunatic here who is deteriorating. But as long as the Republican Party and its adherents and their voters are behind him, you're going to find it very rare for somebody to challenge him in any fashion.
What happens, when let's assume for a moment that he actually doesn't stay.
Yeah, please, let's assume
Who's
it.
who's up next? Yeah, well, no, I think it's going to be hard for them to control the midterms enough to stay in, and I think for a variety of reasons, not the least of which he seems to be losing his marbles. Um, he doesn't stay. Is assuming that's the case. Who's up next?
So,
Who's in the
we
on
have to
deck
offer,
circle for the
yeah,
Republican Party?
we have to offer the giant caveat here that if everything falls apart, as it probably will, um, we may see the usual suspects not emerging in any fashion. But there are two out there who, right now, would be the two obvious uh, possibilities, chilling as it is: J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio. And those are the ones mentioned more often. Rubio having completely sold his soul to the devil, having become, in effect, a mass murderer, responsible with his actions or inactions at this point for more than 300,000 unnecessary deaths, blowing up the State Department and doing many other horrific things, standing by while Russia romps. Um, but all of that is to put himself in a position where he could be an heir to Donald Trump. And I think he probably believes, partly because he has more experience in this vein, running circles around the politically challenged J.D. Vance. But, there might be some other younger nutcases who could emerge as well. It may be that these two will still be considered establishment figures, even if it's the Trump establishment. Or maybe you get a Donald Trump Jr. running to be the heir to his father. Um, all of it looks absolutely pathetic. But that's where we are as of today.
Yeah, that is where we are as of today. Before we went on, you mentioned that I wrote something for Substack yesterday. I wrote a couple this week, but I actually the thing I wrote on Substack, which is I have a Substack called Need to Know, which people can go and look up if they're interested. Um, a
Subscribe.
lot of it subscribe. Well, that's nice of you to say, but people will. Uh, who listen to this podcast will see a lot of the things that I was saying are things that have come out of the podcast, which essentially says that the column says this: we're in a critical moment. The Republicans have been scorched earth for a long time. Mitch McConnell didn't care about rules in the Senate to, get the Supreme Court that he wanted. The White House, the Department of Justice now say the president gets to pick which laws he's going to enforce or not. They've got a Supreme Court which rules for Republicans and not for Democrats. And Democrats for a long time have been sort of following this. Well, we're going to play by the Marquis of Queensberry rules, and Michelle Obama says when they go low, we go high, and all this other kind of stuff. And the result is that we're on the verge of losing our democracy. And my theory is we've got to come back hard against these people, and we have to stop telling ourselves, well, if we do that, they may overreact. They had a fucking coup. They've taken, they're on the verge of a dictatorship. And so, I've said a few things. Some of them are things you and I've talked about. You got to change the Supreme Court. You got to change the rules in the Senate. Maybe you've got to change the rules in the House. Maybe you've got to add a couple of states to the mix. You've got to prosecute people who break the law. You've got to put in place laws that make corruption illegal. You've got to federally finance elections. You've got to do a whole bunch of things, because if you don't fix it and you just get back into this incremental politics as usual thing, we're going to lose every time, because they're going scorched earth, and we've got leadership in the House and Senate that wants to write a vigorously worded social media post.
Spot on. And I think it points out as well some of the great weaknesses in the culture of Democrats and in their own leadership. One part of it is and was, well, they may behave horribly and violate laws, norms, rules, and even the Constitution, but when we come in, we will behave honorably, and the American people will see the difference, and we don't have to do anything more than just behaving honorably. And we know where that got us. It got us to a point where Donald Trump was not held accountable for his violations of the law and Constitution, because we had an attorney general who was going to play by old rules in a new system. It got us a second Trump term because Joe Biden behaved like a traditional president, sending out aid to red states. In fact, passing a law, the Inflation Reduction Act, that gave more benefits to red states and districts than it did to blue states, believing that that's what a president does, and nobody knows it or cares about it. And then they come in and do even more violence to what's going on. And now I was talking today with a prominent House Democrat about countering this belief that this one big, beautiful bill, or as we would call it, one big, massive pile of excrement, as it begins to hit the American people, as it already has with the horrific flooding and tragedy in Texas, as we're going to see over and over again, as they eliminate all of the safeguards and the safety net, including public safety, from people. You have far too many Democrats who believe that Well, people will see this. They will be unmasked and we can romp to victory. There's no guarantee that people will see it that way because the right wing has a really powerful wind machine and we got nothing. And unless we fight fire with fire, use hardball against them, make it clear, and build our own communications network to reach that large share of people who don't pay any attention, who aren't going to know who's responsible for this stuff, then they may prevail again even after they've blown up the economy and killed large numbers of Americans and shredded every single bit of decency that we've had through government and the society. And, the 25 things that you're talking about are a powerful roadmap. Many of them have to wait unless and until Democrats are in power again, and none of it will happen unless they change the rules. But it also has to be the case that if we reach a point, let's say in 2029, where Democrats prevail and have the House, the Senate, and the presidency, there are a couple of things that have to happen. One, as you note, they're going to have to change the filibuster so that they can actually do something, because Republicans will again stymie them. And Republicans have already opened the door for doing this by manipulating the so-called reconciliation process. But the second thing is the next president is going to have to use many of the weapons that Trump has employed, partly because the Supreme Court gave him not just immunity, but all of the trappings of a unitary executive, allowing him now, for example, to fire federal employees almost at will. And Democrats are going to have to clean house. And after that, but only after that, try and build in some safeguards so that the next Trump can't do it again. That isn't going to be easy, but I don't see any great signs that we have potential leaders or presidential candidates out there who truly understand this.
Yeah, I don't. I certainly don't either. And I would say that the 25 things I listed, one could have listed 100. And literally, as I was I think it took me, a half an hour to come up with the 25 things that I was talking about. Half of them are structural things, or that love the kind you talked about. The other half are owning being Democrats and doing what's right for the American people. Because not only do we sort of lose a
Yes.
lot of these incremental, there's a lot of these sort of put battles on structural things, but like, for example, Trump is cutting away healthcare coverage from everybody. That's an opportunity to say, something, everybody should have healthcare coverage. Not some people, not incremental, not that we've been wrong about this. Every other country in the world gives everybody healthcare coverage. We are Democrats. We should give it. And when the Republicans say, oh, no, that's socialist medicine, you just got to tune it out. Say, no, it's not. That's the way the world works. This is what we want to do for people. We want to own this. We want to own protecting the environment. We want to own rational gun control laws. We want to own fair taxes. I would love to see a Democrat who got out there and said, you want to know something? I want to balance the budget. We've done it before. We're going to do it again. You know how we're going to do it? Fair tax code. You know what kind of crazy radical I'm going to take a page out of? Eisenhower. Eisenhower administration tax codes, where the people at the top of the tax code bore some heavier responsibility, and we use that to balance the budget and pay for things. We don't need to spend $1 trillion a year on defense when that's more than the next 8 countries added up together. We can cut 10 or 20% and use that for social programs, or use that for international aid programs that achieve more for our defense than the defense programs do. But all I'm saying is part of it's structural, and part of it's just owning democratic policies and saying DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, we're not going to run away from that. We're for that. We're for a society where everybody has a shot. We recognize immigrants have contributed to our society. Our path to victory is not, as some Democrats saying, well, let's do Republican light on this. and and throw lots and lots of people in jail and show how tough we are. Our path is to be ourselves and be different and do the right thing on these things. And that, I mean, the country was built by immigrants, your relatives, my relatives, the relatives of everybody, including Donald Trump, were immigrants. And so part of it is to just have the courage of our convictions too.
That is also true, oh so true. And I wish I were more optimistic that that will happen. I do think we're actually having an interesting, not entirely constructive debate, partially constructive, over this New York mayoral election and Mamdani. And it's constructive in a couple of ways. One is it clearly reflected a public desire for a new generation of leaders. And I'm never going to criticize many of the older generation. I think people like Nancy Pelosi, Rosa DeLauro, many others who've served for a long time are still passionate fighters with it. They have experience and depth to go along with it. I don't want to challenge them in primaries or force them out, but I think we have to look to a younger generation in part so that we can establish for voters that the Democratic Party that so many didn't like or thought wasn't serving their own interests is turning a page. That is what, in part, that election reflected. It also reflected, I think, the genius of a candidate who knew how to communicate to larger groups of voters and use that issue of affordability, which is not just a New York City issue. We have to find ways to take messages that incorporate all the values that you said, including DEI, including just fundamental decency surrounding, say, LGBTQ people and trans people, and appeal to that fundamental level of decency, but also to show that this is not a party that's just going to seize on slogans because that's how we can get back in power. It can't be a party that, if we do have reasonably fair elections in 2026 in the midterms, and Democrats do extremely well, that believe that they've got the answers, because that'll be a rejection of what's there, but we've got to do more than that going forward. Uh, so there's a lot to think about and to deal with. And we're starting to see, I think, a little bit of the right focus here to not just deal with the triage now of getting through this fight without losing it, because all of a sudden, in a blink, we've got a full-on totalitarian or seriously authoritarian police state with people running around with masks and hoodies, just picking up people at random or picking up those who criticize the dear leader and throwing them in fetid hellhole concentration camps, not just immigrants. Um, that if we can emerge on the other side of this, we have to have the right themes and ones you suggested done by the right people in the right way and reaching the right audiences.
Right. And use this moment as a moment of
Yeah,
opportunity and say to yourself,
exactly.
look at their extremism on healthcare, look at their extremism on the environment, look at their extremism on DEI, look at their extremism on immigration, look at their extremism on fiscal policy, look at their extremism on foreign policy, look at their extremism on these things and see how much it hurts. See the damage it's causing and saying, no, we are going to not go and split the difference with them. We are going to go to the path that is going to do the best things for the American people. And I think you said it extremely well. And I will vote for you, Norm. I still think that the 2028 election, you've got a legitimate chance to be our next presidential candidate. And if the people who listen to Words Matter follow you on the contrarian, and follow you around in the aisles of the Social Safeway or wherever you do your shopping, if those people all line up and they support you, I think we could start a grassroots movement right here.
Ornstein, Rothkopf in 2028. Okay.
I'm happy to I'm happy to be a running
Yeah.
mate. I but I would also probably be the houseboy at the White House if you ask. All right. Well, I think this has been, as usual, very good, very therapeutic conversation. I hope everybody out there listening feels that way. And we've got lots of other things you can listen to here on the DSR network. We had our Deep State Radio yesterday. We've got a Scylla Consciousness coming up tomorrow. We've got a Need to Know with a great historian, Joanne Friedman, coming up.
Great.
We've got, our daily. I won't be doing the daily next week because I'm going to take a little time off to do some writing next week. But I'll be doing our main shows, and I'll be back to the daily the following week. So go listen to those things, and if you like them, by all means, go to the dsrnetwork.com, hit subscribe, become a subscriber, help support what we're doing. It doesn't take much, but it means a whole hell of a lot to all of us, and I think it can make a difference. So thank you for that. Thank you, Norm, and bye-bye.